So this one's an exciting topic. Um, Pen testing was the space that I originally wanted to get back in. So like when I started studying cybersecurity back in 2015, I had asked around and tried to get an idea of the scope of the different domains and what I wanted to do and what might interest me. And pen testing was the thing that sort of struck my interest right away. And I think the reason being ultimately for me was that I felt it actually had good real value to solve root cause problems. And that really that clicks with me. Like I like that. I like solving the root cause. I hate putting out fires all day, like the same fires. I just it kills me inside. And I know it probably kills a lot of people inside, but I think it especially kills me inside. Like I just my will to live just slowly drains. Like I'm not one of those types that you just give me a checklist I can just kind of do like all day in, all day out. I will I will probably leave that job soon if that is my job. It doesn't gel. So um, when I found out like pen testing existed, that was really interesting because it solved a lot of the root causes. That was sort of like number one. Number two is working with people. Pen testing is a huge people oriented delivery. So your work is technical, but how you deliver it is at the person level, which I found really interesting. A lot of the other cybersecurity domains is largely technical in and out, technical documentation, technical communication to technical people. It's just very, very technical all day long. Um, and me, I mean, like I came from hotels and hospitality. And while I've always been a bit of a techie my entire life, kind of like a hobbyist, like a nerd, I'm not gonna deny that. Definitely a bit of a nerd and a geek growing up and whatnot. Still am. I still like working with people a lot. So pen testing really struck out to me as sort of like the blend of both worlds. I had this ability to be my technical, nerdy kind of self, and also had the ability to ultimately use those skills and interests to deliver a human level connection to solve root cause problems. So to me, that really, really struck an interest. That's a little bit about me before I dive into it. I don't know what you guys think about that though, like hearing that. I'm not sure if you've heard that level of story before. The story, and I say that because a lot of the times when I hear people want to get started in pen testing, they're just like, oh, I want to hack, like I want to find exploits, I want to like exploit code and stuff. And the majority of the time, I don't hear people saying that they want to work with people. So that's why I shared that, because I don't hear it often. So maybe you're that type as well, and you just don't know it or just don't want to say it. What are your thoughts on that, chat, though? Hey, Proxy, welcome. Collaborative aspect should be spoken of more. Great combo. Haven't heard of that side either. Yeah, it's a little bit different. Um, you know what, Proxy? That's a good point. I mean, I think the Discord events are good, but I feel like maybe if this was shared as a calendar invite, it would probably be a little bit easier to remind people. Um, I don't know. I wonder if Discord events can tie into calendars. But I should start doing that. I should start actually making these calendar invites. That's a good suggestion. So Drew, you don't think you'd want to do it full time, but would love to have the skills for threat emulation? Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap in the skills that you can develop in pen testing as an interest that you can carry over to a lot of other roles in cybersecurity. And truthfully, even beyond cybersecurity, there's a lot of transferable skill sets. I'm going to talk about that today. Cool. Well, let's dive into it. Let's kind of start talking about this stuff over here. So what I was going to talk about today was this right here. I felt like as like a crash kind of course, like a high level discussion, like the next 40 minutes maybe ish. I thought this kind of covers the basis on a lot of the common questions, at least that I get, that I hear of, that I see, things that I had questions with when I first started. And I want to talk about what actually is pen testing at a really simplified level. I try not to get too textbook because my problem with textbook definitions is if you haven't read the textbook definitions, then you're not going to speak the same language as me. So I try to keep things as simplified as possible in the way that I'm explaining them, a little bit more layman's terms in a I guess a presentation like this. I feel like that music just picked up in volume. 1 second. There we go. I should drop that a little bit. But yeah, so I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about the pen test process and kind of walk you through as viewers and in chat, and please ask questions as I go along. Like, what is this all about? And I want to talk about when you might be wanting to consider a pen test and the difference in red teaming and getting started. So those are pretty important things. Drew, what are you saying over there? Do you see a pen testing course coming in the future? So we had one. We actually had a pen test foundations, like a pen test 101, a pen test 100 type of course. It still exists to some degree. It will come back. It will come back. You'll see it come back. So let's dive into it. So what actually is pen testing? I think at a high level, you might want to consider it to be something of like a snapshot in time. It's a snapshot of discovered vulnerabilities within a given scope and time. That's essentially it. I like to look at it as sort of like your 21-point car inspection. You take your car in for a general lookup, like a general service check, and get a full coverage of all the common ways that your car might be a liability to you. And that is a good way, I think, to think about what a pen test actually is you're taking in a given scope of your network for a liability check. And I would actually peg it more towards like an auditing or QC type of position. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, it says a lot about what it actually is. And it also says a lot about what it actually isn't. It's not a full scan of your network looking for every single vulnerability and here's your report you hand to your stakeholders and you action it. It's not that. It is a limited scope often. Oh, cool. Follower goal. Who just followed? Proxy and Exalted. Thank you very much for the follow. Appreciate that. I got some kind of like weird glitch at the same time that happened though. That was strange. Don't know what that was. I heard like my audio kind of like glitched when I got the follower goal. So something's kind of weird on OBS. But thank you for following. So pen testing is incredibly time limited and it looks for the low hanging fruit essentially. That's kind of what you're doing. Share link for Discord for people randomly joining. Which link are you talking about, Drew? I think I put the Twitch link already in Discord. So we're looking at a time-limited scope, and we're looking at a 21-point inspection kind of thing. I think if you look at it like that, then actually that is what a penetration test is. You are providing a share or a slice or a piece of your network that includes your computers, your mobile devices, your servers. It could be anything that you want. And you're taking that in for a service inspection. And then you're giving that to a very qualified mechanic who can look at your system in a short amount of time and say, okay, based on the most common ways that we see your network to be compromised, then that's what you're doing. So Oshi, you're saying the links are in the About section? Yeah, they are. That's essentially it. It doesn't get more complicated than that. Like at a high level, that is what you're doing. And I think how that is broken up, like how that looks like, is determined by a set of skills. How effective that pen test looks like is essentially how many more of these skills below that you have, and how effective you are with them, how experienced you are with them. And I like to kind of look at it in a couple different categories. There's a software side. This is effectively all software based for the most part, a pen test. There is hardware testing, and they apply in the same way in their own different types of unique ways. But at a high level, you know, your skills of how well you understand how that software works. Most importantly, how does it work over the network? How can it be interacted with? Like, how can you scan it? How can you tamper with it? How can you send packets to it? How can you click on it? How can you send commands to it? How do you interact with that thing on the network? That is a very, very important piece of the software skill set. Another point is how is it installed? So do you understand the configuration behind it? What dependencies does it require? Like, does it require any other software installed? Does it require any other services? Does it require Active Directory things? Like, there's a lot of other things to consider around what's in scope. Permissions. So what level of permissions are required for the software to run? And then kind of a key point here is what level of permissions are required for the software to retrieve and send data. That's huge. At the end of the day, the way that we can determine the outcome or the result of this 21-point card inspection is through data. And how is that data going to be compromised? How are we going to access data that we shouldn't have access to? And that comes down to permissions. So if you understand the permissions of how a certain local app runs, or a web server, and how you can send a request to it back and forth with a response, if you understand that, then you can understand where it might go wrong. What could go wrong along that process? What dependencies could fail? Very similarly, if you're thinking about your car, you take it in for a checkup, and your transmission maybe is not working too well, or your spark plugs are not firing properly, they're choking, the intake is not working properly, your exhaust not working properly. Understanding how all those parts sort of link up to one another, and maybe further down or ahead of the chain of events that all kind of like rely on one another, is very similar to what you want to develop here as a competency when working with data and permissions of this software. So you can see, I haven't even really gotten through this list yet extensively, but there is a huge dependency on your ability to just understand how the operating system, how the software, how the network level of things work. Now, if you are already kind of experienced in the chat and you've taken some courses, you've probably already seen that a lot of the pen testing types of courses are very focused around an already vulnerable state of something, and then you are scanning it and finding that vulnerability and exploiting it yourself. But there's a lot that happens before and a lot that could happen after that that is arguably an important skill set to have to be an effective pen tester. And that comes later on in the ability to provide value for someone. So one thing now to kind of note is that tool knowledge is also important as a pen tester. Like you have dozens and dozens of tools, so many. And it's about knowing when to use the right tool for the right job. However, it is using tools to obtain this. Because you can't know it all. And that's where tools come in. There's no way that you're going to memorize every type of software, every type of user configuration, every type of policy. You need a general good level of experience and exposure, and then you need to rely on your tools to obtain more information for you and do some of the heavy lifting and do some of the collection, that intelligence gathering about what's in front of you, about that scope. And that's really what that's what tools are for in pen testing. So you'll hear me and you'll hear other people that are more experienced in this side kind of harp on newcomers that Kali Linux is not a skill. Like, you can't put that on your resume, for example. You can't put Metasploit as a skill on your resume. You can't say, hey, I'm very skilled in Metasploit. I should be a pen tester. It doesn't work like that. Because that's just another tool to help you obtain competency and proficiency, and ultimately the ability to work within this scope here that I've highlighted to find the vulnerabilities in that 21-point car inspection. So, how you sort of develop these comes from an IT administration level of experience, and it could be personal, it could be home lab. There's a lot of ways to get that experience. You could read like crazy, and if you have a really good ability to take input from a reading level and process that yourself so that you can be output ready right away, some people can do that. That's fine. We all have our own way. But at the end of the day, you still need this experience in some shape or form. Whether you're paid or not paid, whether it's for-profit, non-profit, whether it's a lot of things. Proxy, you're saying, so is pen testing simple, short, period, and red team detail? Yeah, I'm going to talk about that more towards the end, Proxy. But yeah, that is a very key difference. It's like, yeah, go take your car in for a checkup, right? Just go drive in, and then you can pick it up later that day or maybe the day after. That's a pen test. Now, red team would be like, I guess you hire someone to try to steal your car, you know? Like that would be the difference in terms of maybe that analogy right there. Right? Like, I'm going to go like try to hire someone to break into my car and see if they can do it. So you can imagine that might take some time. And if your car is really insecure, they're going to get in real quick. But if you've done everything you needed to do, they're not really going to get in too quickly, right? So, IT administration comes into this. How much experience and knowledge do you have configuring and understanding user accounts, policies, shares, software, permissions, configurations, database connections, all that stuff, right? That's all IT. How much experience do you have configuring networking rules, policies, routing? Again, if you've configured it, if you understand it, then you know where to look for the anomalies or the weak points when you're on a pen test. Like, right away, it's going to jump out at you almost immediately. If you see that you run a permission check on a user and they are a local admin, that's a general understandable example. If you are on a user on an account and they're a local admin, you know you have administrator privileges. So that's like a really easy to understand example of, you run something, you see it, you know what to do with it, and you start looking around from that perspective. Now, magnify that a lot more and start looking into an HTTP request and how it should look like, and then looking for things that shouldn't be there and what you can tamper with, and you start to become a web application-based vulnerability pen tester. AppSec. So that's kind of the point over there. Is You need to really know that stuff first. And you can learn it as you go. That's the point as well. Like, as you get more experience, you learn it as you go. But you do need some level of base knowledge to start from before you start doing this stuff. So, CI, you're saying, is pen testing more network side heavy? It's a good part of it. Yes. Yeah. Very good part of it. Because you need to think about, if you have a web server that's only accessible by like 3 people in the company on a very private network for testing, and then only those 3 people can connect to it from only those 3 workstations once they're logged in, like it's separated, and you run a vulnerability test or you run a pen test on that scope, and you're like, oh wow, like there's so many vulnerabilities. I can run remote code execution from this computer and that computer. But to get there, right? Like if it's a segmented closed gap kind of thing, you would need to get access to those workstations locally, maybe like a USB drive, or you need to compromise the person, get their credentials. There's a lot of steps to get to that level. And the networking portion, understanding what needs to happen to get the data and get the data out or move around the network, is all through the network. Now, we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but we'll talk about stealth, because that's where red teaming and pen testing really differ in that side. But understanding networking protocols, networking traversal, networking discovery, huge. It's a good part of it. So risk management is another big piece. And this is your ability to discern the true level of risk to the organization with your scope given and vulnerabilities that you found. So that's your ability to look holistically at what you found and then make an assessment of, based on what you know of the company and your findings, is this actually, is this risk? And how much risk? So that's a risk management skill set. And then your ability to disseminate it actionably, timely, and with relative information stakeholders. Huge. Finally, technical writing. Technical writing is a very large component. And it may look small, like as one bullet point here in comparison to this, but that's only because I broke this out a little bit more granularly. Technical writing is how you will be communicating your findings. So all of this is then summarized into this. That's something to think about. So your ability to write well, communicate effectively, concisely, using accurate relative terms, and from a lens of what the business should understand to be something of timeliness and be actionable, that is what technical writing is here in this case. And that is a very important component to being an effective pen tester. Because you can have all of this, and if you can't communicate it, you're not that valuable. Imagine if you took your car in for a 21-point car inspection, and the mechanic's reading you the results and says, yeah, it's fine. How's that going to help you? And it doesn't matter how good they are. If they're just like, yeah, it's fine. That leaves you with not a lot of confidence that it actually is fine, right? So think about that as well too. And I think this slide here is, you could walk away with just this, and this could be a good roadmap for you if you wanted to focus on this area. So most domains in cybersecurity include technical writing skill, right? Yeah. Technical writing is involved in almost everywhere inside of cybersecurity, because that is how you are communicating what you're doing. And the reason why it's under such more scrutiny under pen testing is because you're typically then preparing a report to be understood and disseminated to a non-technical audience. Any experience with pen testing in the cloud, specifically your own domain within Azure AWS? Yeah. So that is going to go under like the software side. Like how does software work? And how does it work over the network? And your computer on bare metal and how it's configured is just the same thing, but on the cloud, just with different terms, different definitions. But excuse me, still follows the same protocols, same network protocols, same user protocols. And then there's probably like a little subset of additional AWS specific or Azure specific protocols that you have to learn. But network data, TCP/IP protocol, that's what network is going to be moving along. User permissions, there's always like a base level, an admin level, and maybe a couple in between, depending on how granular you make things. And then there's like specific accesses. So you see, it doesn't change much. You're still looking to see how you can configure and segment things. And then you're still looking to see how you can move data back and forth from that state. So this is your roadmap. If you can target these skill competencies, the more you can do it, the better you are in your area. Do you have to have Microsoft, Amazon permissions to do pen testing cloud if it's your own domain? I can't remember. There is a policy of what you can and cannot do, and how deep you can go using cloud-based resources. I don't know it offhand, but there's only so much you can continue working on. Your own stuff, your own assets, you can kind of go to town on. It doesn't really matter, but you shouldn't be trying to compromise AWS or compromise Azure like Microsoft. Like, you shouldn't be trying to go that direction from your cloud domain. I think that's where the policy sits. So you shouldn't be trying to get to their virtual configurations from your virtual private cloud. Like that's the area you can't go and mess around with. Breaking out from that, essentially. That you'll get in trouble for. So if you set up your own cloud and just stay within it and run like typical scans and things, you're going to be fine. Now, Drew, I recommend you, if you're studying this area, you should try to configure your testing and home lab environment for the target like position or job that you're trying to achieve. So, like if you want to become a mobile device tester, you should be looking at your phone, right? Like you should be trying to breach your phone. If you want to get into AppSec, yeah, there you go. There's your policy. Thanks, Proxy. Thanks for grabbing that. Yeah, so you're effectively going to find some level of policy like this on all of your cloud providers. Stay within it, and you'll be good. Cloud-related platforms considering big tech. Yeah, so like CI, like if you want to become like a cloud security focused type of pen tester, and you really want to focus that route and look for ways to scan and whack like misconfigurations on policies, then you're going to want to learn more about AWS or Azure or GCP, Google Cloud. You're going to want to learn how to do this, like this section. This is what you're looking to learn on that cloud provider. And then you're going to learn how to look for common ways things could be misconfigured. And then that's when you kind of develop this competency section. And then you start using tools to automate that to make your life possible. Not make your life possible, but rather make your life easier, I should say. Where possible. Yeah. Cool. So when in doubt, where do you want to start? Especially for new. If you're new, you want to go to something like this. So this link here, I'll put inside the chat. This is your penetration testing execution standard, P-tests. It's a general kind of framework and standard. It's by no means like the de facto guide. However, like as you can see, like it's back from like 2014, so modernize it as you go. But this is a very good high-level overview of the different phases of what you want to do with penetration testing. Like how do you actually do it, prepare for it, dealing with third parties, like here you go. So what we're talking about in chat, there are a number of situations where an engagement will include testing a service hosted by third parties, become more prevalent. Important thing to remember, permission, client, scope, all that. So here you go. When in doubt, and this is why I love this thing, is if you are becoming your own security consultant and you're performing your own pen test services, you could write your own general policies just from this. And if you're working at a company, they've probably used this or referenced it or something that referenced this to derive their own terms and their own experience to figure out how they want to actually deliver pen tests to a client or to within the company. It's got everything you need, truthfully. So when in doubt, that's a great place to reference, aside from asking questions in Discords and Reddits and Google searching. This is a great framework to look at. So let's kind of walk through the phases, because I look at this a little bit differently, and I think this is a little bit more of a summarized view, if you will. Like here's a good summary, as we'll talk about, of what the pen test process looks like from like a business perspective. There's marketing and sales, there's a scoping, there's your intelligence collection, there's passive and active scanning, your analysis, and then exploitation. And then there's the post-compromise world of things. That's where things get fun. So, marketing and sales. That is where it all begins. How you sell your service is going to determine your clients. So if your company is a AppSec company, you're pretty much going to be doing a whole lot of AppSec types of engagements. And that's good. And if that's what you want to do, then keep doing it. If you're looking for more experience, you might not get it at that company. You might need to go find a different outfit or firm or start your own. So think about that as well in your growth. How you position and sell yourself in the market is going to determine who you can attract and what you can capably do. And if you work alone, you actually need to know how to do this. So if you're your own consultant, you need your own sales and marketing abilities and competencies. And I think, that kind of goes without saying with any of the domains, but chances are you're not going to be seeing like an individual independent contractor as a SOC tier 3 analyst walking around being like, hey, I'm like a SOC tier 3 analyst for hire. Because that would effectively mean you'd have to jump inside their network. Like that's your service. Like you're going to go and hop on their desks, their platform, look at tickets and like solve tickets with them. And that's not a realistic timeline. And to be involved in their operation, like it's just not a service that really is provided as a single person. Maybe as a team, you can provide and that's where you start to get managed service providers. They just manage the entire service for you. So you typically, there's some domains inside of cybersecurity, if you're like a very seasoned individual as like an architect, an engineer, you might be able to offer consulting, compliance as well too. And if you work with someone or for yourself, that'll determine like this section. This section becomes more or less applicable to you. Scoping. So scoping is incredibly important because it will determine what you can and cannot do. I like how the music just kicked in like a dial-in call right there in the background. Don't know what that's about. So, scoping, what you can and cannot do. This consists of your IP range, domains, services, accounts, etc. And then we have the conversation of this white to gray to black box level of testing. So that's like your scope, if you want to, I guess, quantify it in terms of a value. And effectively what it does mean is that the less you know, the more realistic in quotes, of like a threat actor it gets. Now, it doesn't always mean realistic results, however, because if you provide little to no information to a pen tester that is not experienced in red teaming and is not granted the additional scope of red teaming, which we'll talk about later, there isn't much they can do. And the additional scope usually consists of like social engineering, physical, different services, like even like kind of getting out of scope a little bit, and maybe not even having a scope other than like don't take company down. So if you give a very realistic pen test scope, but you give them pen test tools, you might miss a lot of things, and you might mistake that for a red team engagement, and it's not. So truthfully, the more information you can give is typically better, and you definitely want to provide some clear scope and services being used and versions even. You want to provide the pen tester more information because it'll expedite their ability to determine findings. Now, you might say, hey, like that gives you bias. And it does. Yes, it does. Like it gives you bias. So you might be biasing your results. However, a good pen tester will know this, and they will still try to look without the scope, or sorry, without that information being provided to them, and try to work from a more ambiguous perspective. That's going to happen if you're dealing with a seasoned, experienced pen tester. So you'll have some bias introduced, but your results will be provided to you faster and for less money, and a little bit more accurately, I would argue, because if, like I said, if you give them less tools and less scope, they don't have the tools to get out of that scope. It kind of contradicts itself the further you get to the true black box level of testing. So you could sort of simulate a budget level red team engagement, but you get what you pay for. Put it that way. So scope means what you can and cannot do at the end of the day. Any questions on all that so far, though? What do y'all think? Also, Ghost Catholics, thanks for the follow. I need to bring that feed onto my other screen when I'm talking so I can actually see it happen. Sorry. I keep catching that later. There we go. Now I can see it in real time. So what happens if you violate scope? So what you're looking for is Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So you're looking for this. Grab a couple links over here. There you go. At least that one summed it up a little bit better. Yeah, so Drew, it's effectively you're looking at fines and jail time. Effectively. So don't violate scope. Now, it was updated more recently for the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, because that's kind of going to be what you kind of fall back on. If you didn't know, like if you like in law, we talk about things like called the totality of terms. With all good reason and all information provided, you have to make a general assessment that's been provided. Like if it was truly unintentional, you could maybe just kind of walk away with a fine or some business damage, and kind of you pay that and you walk away. Jail time is going to consist when like you know, like, hey, I'm going out of scope. And it would have to be really bad to go out of scope. Otherwise, it's going to be, like I said, a fine, a slap on the wrist, and business damage. So, let me go and link that for you. You want to be looking at the CFA. Those are important. Dangerous times that you live in. Okay, let's take a look at the next couple phases. So once the scope has been decided, we can talk about OSINT and intelligence collection. So now you need to start performing research. And Drew, yeah, so like I wonder if you could include an arbitration clause for accidental breach of scope. Yeah. Excuse me. Typically, when you're doing this phase over here, so marketing, sales, and scoping, here you're typically going to have like your business policies. You know, like in the result of accidental or incidentals, etc. Maybe the engagement stops. Maybe you redo it. Like you talk about this. People aren't trying to get you. You know, like they want you to find problems with their scope, but it's also within reason. If you go to a mechanic, again, like I said, always kind of look back at that. You go to a mechanic, you take your car in for a checkup and look up at a 21-point inspection, and the mechanic drills through your windshield. And it's like, oh, whoops, like, sorry. Like, if they're not going to pay for that, you're probably going to take legal action. That's kind of what would happen if you did that in a pen test. You drilled through the network and you made a mistake, and you're not going to like fix it. That kind of stuff. That's where legal action actually will happen, or fines, or charges, court. But businesses aren't going and trying to start pen tests or pick up a consultancy or pen tester and then try to charge them. It's not like we're loaded. We have tons of money. So maybe that will ease some thoughts over there. And Cap City Gaming, thanks for the follow. Welcome. Thanks for joining in. Fun times. So, OSINT and Intel. Let's talk about that. So we're talking about, once we know the scope, we need to use intelligence collection tools and techniques to generally just discover what is inside the scope truly beyond what was provided to us. So we're looking for already breached accounts, exposed passwords, shares, and this is all considered like public level scanning of scope at this point in time. Social media accounts. Did someone post a picture of themselves with their password on a post-it, right? Like, that has happened. Things like that. So you're doing general discovery and intelligence collection of your target. And your target is what is inside of your scope. You're also trying to understand the tech stack, what services and applications are being used, what web services, what providers. Are they on AWS? Like, you know, you guys in chat are asking if you need to get experience inside of a cloud provider. Maybe if you find out a little bit more about their cloud stack configuration, that'll help you in your pen test. So that's where you need to know this stuff. What do you guys think? What do you guys think so far? Is it getting too much? It kind of just keeps going. All right, so passive scanning. Let's move on to that. Passive scanning. Passive scanning now starts to use some additional tools, and you might have seen them before, like Nmap or Nessus, Qualys, Invicti, which is now known as like NetSparker, things like that. You start to use off-the-shelf tools to automate this stuff. Automate this, like figuring out this on the spot of what you know and what you don't know. You typically will be using default scripts, so default configurations of things where possible, because you don't want to interact with the lay of the land at this point in time. You don't want to try and change the state of your scope as much as possible. You want to get a true image overall of what is the current snapshot of what I'm dealing with. Who's logged into what services are running, what resources, which network protocols are talking to what is, you're essentially, for all intents and purposes, you're establishing a baseline of your pen test scope. Like, what is the normal, or what is the baseline normal right now? You start to leave these scans running in the background. This is where the automated side of things kind of kick in to speed it all up. Like, imagine going through a website and going through all of their different pages, all the code, clicking on everything. That is where you start to use automated tools to speed that up for you. And then you start to poke around manually. While that's running, you start to go and do manual tests where these automated tools can only get so deep and so far. So you start to take apart individual HTTP requests and kind of like walk through them and look at each individual header and change maybe things that you know won't screw anything up too much, like GET requests, so like you're taking resources off the server. You try as little as possible to interact with the data, like I said. So you click around, you inspect things manually, you do things that a normal user could do, or a user with some advanced IT knowledge. That's kind of what passive scanning is there. Observation. And then you move into the active scanning phase. So you're not exploiting anything yet. You are now, however, interacting with data. So like I said, before we looked at an HTTP request, and perhaps you might try to, maybe you're just going to try to log in with a normal user account at that point in time. And that's kind of gray. That could be kind of swung to either direction depending on the scope of what is active or passive. But generally, not a problem. Like clicking on a submit button on a normal user function, generally not a problem. Now, the active scanning phase, however, is going to be more like trying to trigger an error. And that's kind of what you want to do, is you do want to get the services or protocols or state of your scope to trigger some type of error or behave in a way that it might not want to. You want it to pause. You want it to respond to you in a way that is unknown to maybe the design of how the engineers configured it. But you don't want to exploit anything at this point in time. And by exploiting, I'm saying you don't want to start to achieve like lateral movement, vertical movement. You don't want to try and get further in your scope at this point in time. You just want to mess around with it and try to trigger errors and breaks and pauses. And that's all what you're looking for here. Now we start to move into exploiting. And this is when we have determined from finding errors and bugs and breaks and pauses and weird behavior by kind of poking around. And maybe a way to think about it would be like if you're surveying a building and your objective was to sort of like pen test that building and look for a way in. You might go and look at the windows as a passive scanning measure, like windows around the building. And from an active measure, you might just try to tap the window to see if it opens. Just like a little bit, but not a lot, just a little tap. The exploiting stage would be you actually physically are opening the window and waving your hand inside, or you're kicking it open. That's maybe a better way to think about it in terms of the threshold of what you're trying to achieve. So now, like I said, we've discovered vulnerabilities, we are exploiting them, and what you're doing here is you're looking for exploits that are typically off the shelf, proof of concept tools and scripts. Maybe you found CVE 123, 2010, whatever. That'd be really old, but imagine you found that. You would either have a script ready or you would go and search for one or a tool that could already exploit that for you. And then you're going to look at the scripts, you're going to look at the proof of concept codes, and you're going to make sure that before you run them that you understand what they're doing, like which policies they're interacting with, what they're about to do. You don't just fire away. And that is the general exploitation of what a pen test will get you to do. very, very rarely and seldomly are you going to be writing specific custom code at a very deep level. You might be configuring or adjusting scripts or tweaking a value here and there based on your findings, like which policy or which permission you discovered. But you are not going to be writing bare bones exploit code top to bottom. Very, very, very rarely. And typically that is going to be something at a very senior level to get through a very weird hurdle of like, hey guys, like I found this service, it's behaving erratically, there's no public exploit. Does anyone have an idea about what kind of code can we send or transmit to that service or protocol? And you might try and start crafting something custom at that point, but it's going to be much more the rare side. And there's a good reason for that. One of them being the length of the pen test. Like I said, is a 21-point inspection. You just want to know, taking your car in, that there's a failure, but you don't want the mechanic to go and break your car apart and be like, hey, I proved it to you. I told you your engine was going to fail, so I went and I just broke it for you. And I patched it back up to kind of prove my point. If the mechanic could say, like, hey, like I'm showing you this is, if I just like touch this, it's going to explode, that's enough. So that's kind of what I'm saying. There's a reason why pen tests are structured the way that they are, because that's what you're paying for, a short window of time to get a very immediate level of action provided to you, what you need to do to start reducing that cyber risk. You don't need to go all the way. And that's where you start to get maybe layered levels of pen tests, kind of doing one after another, or you start to do red teaming or your own internal threat emulation and such. Now, there's a caveat here, is when you're exploiting things, if you discover a very large amount of user PII or IP, so we're talking about anything that can identify, right? Personal identifiable information, like social security numbers, health records, things that are essentially out of scope, you know, like very personal in that matter, or intellectual property, like you discovered maybe a diagram or perhaps even a workflow of what the company is working on next that is supposed to be confidential and sensitive. Anything that could compromise the business or their people in a way that someone else can now access, like if you just found that on a shared drive and they didn't know about it, those are things you flag right away. Like you don't go through the rest of the pen test. You flag these things right away to the team so they can take it off, and then you can come back and say like, hey, you found that on the engagement. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because once you find something that sensitive, that confidential, your job is to immediately escalate it. So that's an important part of exploitation. So now we get to the post-exploitation stage. And this is now where we've done what we can inside of the scope given to us, and we've discovered new layers of that scope. So maybe in your IP address range, you could only access workstations A and B. But now that you got to B, you can now access workstations C, D, E, and F within inside that IP scope. And you do this all over again. So you go back, and you go back to the intelligence collection, you go back to the passive scanning, you go back to the active scanning, you go back to the exploiting, and you just keep doing this. And what you're trying to do is effectively get to the highest level of vertical access or lateral access. And this could be user counts, this could be services, this could be software, it could be a number of things. But it's all about access level at this point. We are trying to elevate our access level to obtain things beyond our current level of permission scope, still within side general scope. And we're also trying to find access to things within the same level of scope as well. So that's what you're kind of looking for. And you just rinse and repeat. That's effectively it. And you're looking for that low-hanging fruit. You keep going, a short window of time. And you take a hell of a lot of screenshots. You screenshot, everything. Any questions on that so far? I'm not seeing a lot of questions pop up, so let me slow down a little bit. What do y'all think? It's a couple Discord messages too, huh? No questions? Or you're busy and it's work. It's all good. I get that too. So which movement is better during research? I mean, value-wise, vertical is better because you're getting higher and higher up in your permission scope. However, just because your current user can't vertically go up, it doesn't mean that maybe another lateral user doesn't have access to go up. So you want to look around too at the same level because it might yield something going up as well. Do pen tests ever involve doing the operation on a sandboxed machine that is not part of the prod environment? Yeah. Yeah. It could be part of dev, staging, anywhere along the production cycle. Now, you're going to find companies that are a little more risk averse. Typically, they don't want you to be testing on prod. And typically, if they do, that means like they're pretty confident they've been through other pen tests before, they can afford it, and they're paying you bigger money because the risk, right? The higher risk is involved. So testing on prod is something that you're going to want to charge more for. You can do it. You can do either one. It'll just determine your scope and money involved and time. Knew it. First time chat. Welcome. Better is also a bad perspective. Yeah. So real pen tests are not CTFs. All vulnerabilities have to be exactly. Yeah. So kind of a common misconception when pen testers start that are new, or maybe consultancies that are still developing their maturity levels of their skill competency as pen testers. They might sell their services of like, we're going to get to your Active Directory admin, right? We want to get to the domain controller. We want to get to your admin level at that stage. Perfect. We have domain admin creds, like we pop DA. And then they kind of just like stop, like, oh, there's not really much more. And like I said, that's not the point. And that's kind of what New it's talking about there. I agree with you, right? Like we're looking at a 21-point card inspection, like we're looking for the full scope. You might just find perhaps that maybe a printer web page for their administrative panel is accessible, and that is it. Like that is it. You can change that. You can mess around with it. That's still a vulnerability. That's still something you need to report, and that's something you should be looking for within your results. It's not a critical, it's not a high, but it could maybe deny the service of your accounting team if that's their printer and they're trying to print, and an hour of business time costs a lot of money and their printer goes offline. You're paying for that. Like that's part of your pen test too. Like I said, you're looking for general cyber risk, and I think I have it on the next slide actually. Maybe towards the end. Where did I put it? I know I put it somewhere here. Yes, reporting. So now we're at the reporting stage. So this is what you're trying to do. And I think that's what New is trying to say is you're categorizing all the vulnerabilities that you discover and exploits discovered with a level of risk at this point. And what you're looking for is effectively anything that compromises that CIA triad, which I think for some of the students in the room that have heard me say this before, you've heard me say this with SOC work. You've heard me say this with GRC. You've heard me say this now under the pentesting lens. At the end of the day, your cyber risk is a value of how much it is compromising one of these three things. And anything that compromises those states is a vulnerability, and the degree that it does is the level of the vulnerability to be classified as. The immediacy you need to act on it based on what it can do, what it can lead to. And that's where that printer vulnerability could fall into. That could fall under a level of availability being compromised on the network. So you need to keep going within the scope and time that you have. You have your general things you're looking for within a 21-point car inspection, right? Like all like the major common things, and then you just keep looking around that as you go. And you pay more. You pay more for more time. If you're looking for a 2-day pen test, which happens, well, you're getting a 2-day pen test. If you pay for a 5-day or a 2-week, you're getting 5-day or 2-week, and it's gonna be much deeper. So yeah, we're at the reporting stage now. And we're looking at the ability to essentially communicate two things. So how much the business can be compromised and how likely based on your findings. That has to be in your report. Like that is what you're telling either your company or client. So how much can the business be compromised based on what you found? And how likely will it be based on what you found? And then ultimately your report should be able to communicate something like what are the top 3 things like you need to do now? And that could be more, it could be like top 5, 10, but I'm saying that in a sense of just generally understanding the objective here. We are just trying to communicate like what now are you needing to do? Now, in terms of templates, whoops. This is a very common question. I had this too when I first got started, right? Is how should my report look? Look, you're going to come across a lot of templates. And if you work for a company, they probably already have a template defined, branded. They had a lot of people look at it and audit it and make sure that they're not legally saying or doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So you will have a report template that you typically might fill up values or fields, and it generates and spits out a report for you. And then there's like general description boxes that you just write and fill in your own words. If you're your own consultant, you probably are just going to come up with your own preferred style and your own ways to describe legalities, your own ways to quantify cyber risk to the business, etc. You will come up with your own report template. There are a lot to look at. There are many repositories that just include samples of pen test reports. And if you take a look at them, they're all shapes and forms. But at the end of the day, what they are trying to do is this. They are trying to just communicate these two things clearly. And that is it. Your report needs to get that across. So your communication abilities, as we talked about earlier on, is extremely important to distill this stuff down and disseminate it to your target audience. Now, your findings also require remediations. So you can't just go and run a Nessus scan and then hand out the printed output of vulnerabilities to your internal team or your client and say, here's your pen test. It's not a pen test. Yeah, I've heard that before, and it's not. I mean, like that's like a low level kind of like maturity kind of thing. But keep that in mind. So, Master Troll, welcome, Master Troll 12. What are the benefits of hiring a pen testing team versus using an automated tool like Scythe? Put it this way. I'm not sure if you're here kind of earlier on, but like I look at the pen test as this. Like, here is what your pen test is, and we talked about the skills. If you take your car in, if you take your scope, your network, your assets in for an automated tool, like just like, hey, I'm going to run a scanner on it, like a diagnostic, it's going to like tell me what it is. It's missing a lot of the human ability to discern relativity, validation, like is it actually real? Context, did it scan properly? Did it scan something that it shouldn't have? The automated tools are great, but they're a piece of the puzzle. And we talked about that here, that the tool knowledge of using a tool, any scanning tool, is effectively the ability to determine this inside of your pen test. So when you hire a pen testing team, you are paying for this knowledge, and you're paying for all of this knowledge as well too. And that's where I was saying earlier on that tools cannot provide that for you. They provide you a general ability or general snapshot assessment of what your terrain looks like and where it might be vulnerable. But when you hire a human and you hire a pen testing team, you're hiring and paying for all the experience that they have in all these additional areas to provide you the most relative and context accurate results of your attack surface. So if you take your car in for a little diagnostic check, you plug in a little tool. I can't remember what those things are called. Those readers you plug inside the diagnostic port. You plug that in yourself. It tells you what's wrong. That's it. That's what you're paying for with the tool. You take it to a team of 3 mechanics that take your car apart, look at all the different areas. OBD scanners, yeah. thanks, Dan. You take your team to a tool of pen testers, you're getting everything else. To a team of mechanics, you're getting all the other nuts and bolts. That's what you're paying for. You're paying for time, experience, relativity, and context-aware results. And most importantly, validation. Validation's huge. You can't just run a Nessa scan and hand that. You have to look and see if the scan was validated and if it's true. There's a lot of false positives on those scanners. Okay. A couple more things. So yeah, when to pen test. So that's another common thing when we first get started. A lot of students, when they first hear about pen test, they're like, "Oh, it's cool," and it is. I love it. That's why I got into it. When do you actually perform your pen test? Well, that is after your baseline has been established inside of your enterprise or SMB network. That means you know what is normal load of your network, normal services, normal usage, normal protocols, normal everything, known, expected, good, trusted state. Your baseline has been established. It also means that you've deployed additional best practices and controls. So you have segmentation, you have isolation, you have intrusion detection system set up, you have active scanning happening on your endpoints, passive scanning as well too, looking for different types of threat detection. You're looking for anomalies, you're looking for behavior trends, you're looking for indicators, all that good stuff. You do all of that first, ideally. You do all of that first, ideally, and I'll say that why in a second. And then you do your pen test. So it's quite late stage in your layers of security controls that you do. So why am I saying ideally? Because everything that I just said is actually quite a lot of time and money. And it's not just a lot of time and money. You may not have the resources internally, or your team or your service that you're paying for may not even be able to have that level of skill to provide that for you. And you only know what you know. So ideally, you have very strong internal security teams and IT teams, and very strong external MSPs, perhaps managed service providers, if you can't do it internally, to really validate and make sure that your network is in good condition, your baseline is trusted and established. And then you do your pen test. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's not always going to be possible. There are SOC analysts that are in the field right now that have trouble determining where a persistence mechanism might live inside of Windows. And that's true. That is a true thing. But that's probably, that might be what they know. And the company might be certain that that's, like, we have a SOC analyst, like they're monitoring our network. So you might run a pen test, And the pen test might go and drop a persistence mechanism, and there may not be any detection rules set up to catch that. They might deviate or hide from an EDR or an AV tool, and they show the report. And arguably that is a basic thing, but it could be missed. And that's a bit of an extreme, exaggerated example, but it is an actual example, and it does happen. So when I say ideally you've gotten your basics down first, and basics aren't easy. And then you bring in your pen tests, because otherwise you're paying a lot of money for someone who can come in and just show you where to hit with a hammer. And they're going to charge you a lot of money for that. Arguably, you need to get everything else nailed down first. And not only that, if you are just paying for that service, you're missing out on the value of the pen test to really look for all the additional low-hanging fruit that they're experienced and skilled in for. So be careful. If you're listening and you are looking to pay for a pen test, make sure you're confident, and do some analysis and do some research on your own network first and your scope. Because you may end up finding a pen tester or a consultancy that'll happily take you in for the money, and they'll charge you for it, but you can maybe spend that money better elsewhere. So that's something to keep in mind. So, last couple points here are the red teaming side of things. So, pen testing does not equal red teaming, and red teaming can equal pen testing. So, there's a big difference in terms of the general objectives, really, at the end of the day. Like I said, if you kind of look back at your pen test over here, you're looking for that general 21-point car inspection, looking for all of the general vulnerabilities on your attack surface and your terrain. The red team is not looking for the 21-point car inspection. They're looking for maybe one of those things on that car inspection. Maybe their objective is get to the server room, or obtain access to a C-suite member's laptop, something like that. Obtain access to this server, this process, that, like, it's a very targeted operation. And how you target, like, what's the scope of that red team type of thing, it's going to depend on a lot of factors, a lot of motivations, financial, socioeconomic, geopolitical kind of relations, industry, you name it. It's typically a much more precision-based, almost surgical level of operation to really make sure that you're safe and secure from what you would consider to be your most likely and relative threat. So, actually, that kind of answers a little bit. Yes, I knew it. So would you consider red teaming as part of pure adversarial emulation? Yeah, and that's kind of actually what I was just... So good timing for your question. It's kind of what I was going to like start segueing into, is that now red teaming is really trying to figure out, it uses a lot of cyber threat intelligence beforehand to figure out, like, what is your relative threat? Like, who and what is your threat to your organization or your business, etc. So it requires a strong level of analysis from CTI, cyber intelligence side of things, doing research and analysis on your attack surface. And that doesn't even require pen tests. It's just good research. And then once you determine what are your most likely threats, then that is where you start getting to the red teaming side, which effectively is adversarial emulation. That's a good way to kind of look at it. They're sort of the same thing. Now, the only thing I would say that they differ in is adversary emulation is something you could do in-house. You don't need a red team to do it. It's just pure red teaming at that point. And red teaming is a little bit more classified as maybe a service or an engagement that you pay for, and it requires external resources to get a true picture without bias. Because if you do adversary emulation in-house, it's really hard to look away from where you think something is going to happen. Like, really, really hard. You could run Caldera, you could run scripts that emulate TTPs and threat actors all day. You could do that all you want. but there's still going to be a good amount of bias if you try to do it in-house for the adversary emulation piece. So that's sort of like one piece of it, which you should be doing. As you kind of skill up in your security maturity levels, you should be doing adversarial emulation with your knowledge and your level of bias, which is included. Now, a red team engagement kind of removes that final piece of bias and says you hire an external firm that doesn't really know anything about you, and you get probably the truest picture of what is the most likely way that someone will get in based on a high skill level profile to obtain an objective that you're worried about. I hope that kind of answers what you're looking for there, Nuit. So yes, red teaming is adversary emulation, but it should also be differentiated as an external service, and it's part of the puzzle. Yeah, you're welcome. Cool. So almost done, kind of like a pentesting overview. A couple other points about the red teaming side of things is that you're also going to be having the social engineering. You're going to be having maybe physical access involved, phone calls, like a lot more. It's not just like pen testing kind of gets close to here. You might do what's called like an assume the breach scenario. That's a more common industry term, where you're given access to like an actual domain user on the network, and you remote in, and then you try to pivot vertically and laterally from there. But even then, you might get some social engineering, but not truly social engineering, because again, that's just going to be like an email list that you can hit. Whereas a red team just goes so much deeper. You can phone call it at any hour of the day kind of thing. You could catch an employee walking out the door. So much more to sort of social engineering from a red teaming perspective. And it requires a lot more skills than just IT. Psychology is involved. You name it. There's so much more involved in the red teaming side. So again, that's like your highest tier of getting an assessment of relative risk. So what is purple teaming in comparison to red teaming? So the purple teaming aspect is the ability to have a red and blue skill set to deliver service or provide value. So it requires skills on both ends of the spectrum, and that is how you get a purple teaming level type of value or service. There's no such thing as like a purple engineer. There's really no such thing as like a purple team test, because it's too surface level. Way too surface level. It has to be defined further in scope. A purple team maybe skill or value could be the ability to write detection rules, having an attacker skill set and a defender skill set. So somewhere like detection engineering, threat engineering, they're kind of referred to in both ways. That would be a purple team type of role. It does require both. And the stronger you are in both, the better your results will become. Now, from a red teaming perspective, if the red team report that you're asking for, you want to know all of that defensive blue team tradecraft based experience, if you want to know that knowledge to prevent or remediate the findings of a red team engagement, then that would ultimately become a purple team based value inside of the report that you're paying for. Similarly, a pen test, if you provide that 2021 car inspection here, if you are providing specific like Active Directory policies to implement rules, configuration-based changes on service configs, you're providing a purple team level of service. And that's where I was talking about here. I'm not sure if you were here earlier, but this, like the more you have of this here, this skill set, the stronger you are as a pen tester and ultimately a red teamer eventually in the future. And this here is actually a purple team skill set. All of this. It requires both sides, attack and defense. Do you want to become a purple team master troll? So what about Bug Hunter? Is Bug Hunter Pentester or red team? Pentesting, more so. It's everything that we talked about in the here, where this general process. That's kind of what your bug bounties look like. You kind of just like walk through this. Just maybe some things omitted, like there's no marketing sales stuff, but same kind of thing. Whoops. So, Master Troll, you want to become purple team. Then you want blue and red team skill sets. And then you can go and look for roles within detection engineering and maybe some higher tier analyst types of roles and engineer roles inside of deeper forensics. So like malware analysis, reverse engineering, that kind of requires a little bit of both. Can the red teaming value be provided by an expert with Caldera? No. No, so Caldera is just it's a script. You're just executing known TTPs and behaviors with some level of adjustment, a little bit of dynamic operations involved, like a little, but it's an automated attack based on already known established attacks. A red teaming value, you don't need Caldera, and you shouldn't be using it. You should be going in and looking at the attack surface and making your own assessment right then and there with your own custom tools and scripts and stealth. Caldera is really noisy. I'm not sure if you've ever ran it and actually monitored the traffic that it generates. Super noisy. Red team is about stealth, not being detected. Pentest doesn't care. Caldera is more for adversary emulation. That's for just like making a hell of a lot of noise. Neo, it's saying red team is kind of like pretending to be an assassin. Yeah, you're basically pure assassin. In and out operation. Yeah. Cool. So getting started. Yeah, we can run a little bit more in the stream. So getting started. What do you want to do? Like how do you want to get effective in this area? You want to learn the IT side of things. Yeah. Red team is a ninja. Yeah. That's a good way to think about it. Ninjas, ninjutsu. So the IT side of things is what you want to do. Is you need to understand how the operating system actually works, like how the TCP/IP protocol behaves based on which protocols are transmitting up and down the transmission. How do the packets look like? The headers involved. How do they get misshaped, misconfigured? It requires a strong amount of IT understanding. And look, and that's why I have this kind of down here. I'll just get to that right away. You could skip all of that. You could go and hack the box and get your CPTS, which I hear is really good. I need to check out soon. Go and get your knowledge to just scan and exploit things. That's a small portion of it. You could do that. You could skip all of it. But if you're on the report and you don't know how you took down a network because you spammed an authentication protocol and you had a huge lockout on 100 users, or you can't explain why an SMB vulnerability is less important as per your report or more important than a other vulnerability that you discovered. If you can't explain that, you can't walk the person through that versions, providing a level of order and magnitude, it's really, really going to hurt. And that imposter syndrome, which honestly is just, it's a strong imbalance. It's just like you're really imbalanced on your IT knowledge. If that area is really imbalanced and you're very, very strong on your ability to scan and exploit based on like those kind of CTF-y, hack the boxy, known already vulnerable environments where, yes, you will develop the ability to kind of spot anomalies. If you're very strong there, but you don't have the ability to communicate your findings and explain with relative understanding of what needs to be acted on, you don't really have a lot of value. That's not the point. And I think this comes from new audience members here. I said that earlier. If you go take your car in for an inspection and the mechanic's like, yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's fine. What does that mean, right? Like, what's the point? But if you take it in and the mechanic, who maybe has less knowledge than the other guy, walks you through it, explains like, hey, like you actually really need to look at this. Like, yeah, your filter is plugged over here. Your exhaust is not emitting the proper emissions. Like you're going to fail your inspection. Things like that. Like if they can walk you through it, that's immediately more valuable to you, and that's what you're paying for. That's what you're doing with the pen test, is you're looking for that value to immediately reduce and mitigate your attack surface based on cyber risk as much as possible. So that comes with all of the other stuff here, like all of this IT stuff. Learning how things work and why they do and what's more important than the other. Skip it at your own peril, I should say. You could skip it, but it will come back to hurt you. And you will have to learn it sooner or later if you really want to become an effective and valuable pen tester or red teamer as you move up in the field. So let's talk about maybe some of the general courses as well that you can take. There are some good courses out there. But a lot of this you could do in your home lab, and we'll kind of hit that up right away. So, resources. First of all, team up. Go and find a buddy. Find people like you that are interested in this kind of thing, because pen testing is so vast. It is so broad and covers so much. There is so much exposure that you definitely want to be working with others and collaborating and picking each other's brain. Different perspectives, different levels of experience, different walks of life. Very, very valuable when you want to start this area. I highly recommend, before you even start doing any exploitations, so like after you've learned the IT side of things, and again, you can skip it, up to you, teach their own. I recommend you start with IPSec first. IPSec is fantastic. So if you don't know who IPSec is, IPSec is a guy that goes around and he does full walkthroughs on vulnerable machines from primarily Hack the Box. I'm not sure if he's been doing any other ones as of late. I guess he's doing some streams as well too. But he will literally walk you through like the entire process. And then the cool thing is, if you go to like IPSec rocks, like this is amazing. Oh, he works for Hack the Box now? Cool. So if I were to type in maybe something like SMB, right? Here are all the videos and with timestamps of what he has used with different tools to identify, enumerate, and exploit SMB-based vulnerabilities. How great is that? SSH? 335 results, so it's actually getting too much. Telnet? SMTP? You get the point, right? Put in the protocol, put in the version, if it's there, like do some typing in for whatever you'd like. And these are vulnerable boxes. So like here's an example of the tentacle box, it's called. That's the name of the box. Running Python OpenSTPD exploit script CVE. If I click on this,
There's only one Python script here. Python's the easiest to work with, so I'm going to do a
So good.
searchbloit-x on this
There you go.
and see.
So before you go and pay for any training, here is IPSEC with a ton of full walkthroughs for you to go and develop your competencies. Once you watch some, that's what I recommend. Just go and watch some. Go find some of the easy boxes here. Watch his process. Because I could sit here and walk you through a general methodology. Probably isn't going to stick. He's like, just watch him. Just go and see what he does before you do anything. Watch how he starts up and he runs his Nmap scripts, his GoBuster scripts, his Dirbuster, like all the stuff that he runs. Just go and watch what he does. Start going through and seeing what the technical side of looking through enumerating systems and services or vulnerabilities looks like, the tools involved, the level of competency, things that you don't understand, and then you can go and do some studying and reading first, come back to it. Maybe you need to take like a crash course weekend in Python so you can understand Python code, Ruby, JavaScript. Maybe just do a crash course on those. Go and brush up on your Linux, things like that. And then once you are feeling better about that kind of stuff, then try your own hack the box. Yeah, you're welcome, Drew. Yeah, I'm gonna hop off here shortly too, but I'm glad it helped. So then try your own VMs. Like go and either configure yourself, which I highly recommend. Go and configure your own vulnerable virtual machine. So set up like Apache, get a web server running, and then go and mess around with it, and then run an Nmap scan on it and see what happens. That's high value, is kind of going through that. And maybe download some vulnerable machines. So OWASP Shop is fantastic for a whole bunch of web application-based vulnerabilities. There's a bunch of others. And configure them, and then just go and just exploit them. And build your methodology from there, and write reports. When you've started to do that, and you've got a bit of the lay of the land, then I'd recommend to actually start going and paying for training if you really want to kind of go further. Like I've said, I heard the CPTS is really good. I need to check that a little bit more, at least some initial reviews. It kind of looks like things that I think the area was lacking. PH, Practical Ethical Hacking, is a really good like general. It's a pretty broad overview. I think it's like 29 or 30 hours. So it's good. Like it's going to give you a good breadth. You're going to learn a lot of like the different areas of things. Highly recommend it. And then maybe consider the OSCP, which is good in its own way. I've talked about that in another stream. It's good in its way to test you for your ability of how much you've generally been exposed to and your ability to kind of like spot anomalies like on the spot. It's good for that. The area that the market is sort of struggling with though for pen testing training and red teaming is the ability to prepare reports, classify it, vulnerability mitigation and management, remediation, prevention steps, detection, stuff like that. Like that's kind of missing. And maybe we'll get there one day as an industry. So you still need to develop that elsewhere if you want to go and be effective and get started in this area too. So that's where like this slide before it is all that stuff, this like the IT side. And there's a variety of ways to get that. Defensive courses, defensive training, but you do need that side. Otherwise you will just be a script kiddie. You're just going to be going and running scripts, calling it a day. So those would be my immediate recommendations to go ahead and do. And then of course you can refer back to the P-test. So I have that over there, I think here. Yep. So this is a general framework you can always fall back on. So you can build out your own reports and structure. And then refer to things like the Bishop Fox style guide. Bishop Fox style guide. So this is really good to refer to different types of terms and definitions, like how you should actually say them and write them so that it's all consistent in your reports. So if you can do that, if you can go through the IT side of things and you can go through this level of training and then maybe consider some paying, that would be very, very good. That'd be a great start. You're definitely on your way at that point. And then it's just a matter of building your portfolio and applying to jobs as you go. That's kind of it in a bit of a nutshell. So CI, did I watch Sandra's video on the other defense program? Not yet. I'm a little bit behind in catching up on Sandra and YouTuber videos. But I like Sandra. She's awesome. She's so good. Actually, I really like her. She provides a lot of value for the industry. I love her coverage. So I do need to check it out at some point. Oh man, I just realized this. Sorry, my screen was kind of cutting that off over there. I'll put these slides after inside of Discord, but I hope that helps. I hope you guys have enjoyed. I got a couple more minutes over here before 3. So, knew it. Can you talk about moving from, let's say, no cybersecurity experience, but having OSCP? I know you mentioned work in projects and write-ups, but I would be curious how you leverage that to get into formal employment. Yeah. So knew it. I think the way to look at it that would be helpful is if you don't have the professional paid experience for formal employment, you need to develop that experience somewhere else and then be able to demonstrate and show it. So based on kind of what I was saying through like the general process of what it looks like this stuff here, if you caught that, like the actual pen test itself, if you can go get a home lab built up, maybe do it at your company. If you work for a company, even if it's non-IT, and you're training, maybe you can do like a vulnerability assessment on your network, and maybe you can advance it further from there. You can do it at home. You can do it for friends. You can do it for nonprofits. You can do it for volunteer experience. Just make sure like your legalities are checked out. But there's a lot of ways to gain pen test related experience without formally being a pen tester or an IT professional prior to. Those things that I mentioned is how you're going to get it. And having your OSCP demonstrates like, hey, like he's certified, like he's got his cert. Cool. Like we can trust at this point in time, at least the trust but verify mindset. We can trust that you have the technical ability to spot anomalies and enumerate for known and low-hanging fruit the vulnerabilities, and be able to exploit them with either proof of concept in public or perhaps light custom code, like light, very light. But that's good. It's very good you have that because it's the most marketable certification and it will get you in the door for recruiters. But you need a portfolio because if you don't have the experience, you need to show it. You have to show it with a portfolio. So there's two things I want you to consider, Knew it. Education is one part, which you have. OSCP is education. You now need to show experience. You can go get more certs if you want. You can get all the certs you want, but that's all just education. You need to show experience in the ways that I mentioned. Portfolio, personal projects, friends projects, your company, nonprofit, volunteer, put write-ups on a GitHub, put that in a portfolio site, and say, I have created Good Corp. If you've created a Good Corp, it has 2 Windows workstations and a server and a Linux machine. Like build a custom network and then attack it. Do that. And then make that like actually walk through on your portfolio. Like, hey, I've done a pen test. Here's the company configuration. Here are the users. Here are their permissions. So you configure the whole company. Like make an SMB network, small medium-sized business. Build that, attack it, write up your report, upload your report, and have all the things that I was just talking about today. And hey, that shows you can do it. That's good. You just need to do more of that after that. And then ideally you can start doing some of this, like you said, yeah. So you're interested in, real experience. So go go and like I said, personal, friends, volunteer, nonprofit, your current company, even if it's non-IT, see if you can run an SS scan, like that kind of stuff. Like work your way up from there. Start with an SS scan, a vulnerability assessment on a real company network, then move into that. Master Troll 12. So can you discuss a general path for moving from a blue team role to a purple red team role? Yeah, so I'm not sure which role you would be inside of blue. Like if you're a SOC analyst, what you want to do is get past like the SOC tier 2 type of stuff and start getting into maybe like detection engineering, digital forensics, and incident response. Start specializing a little bit further inside of that blue track. And you want to get as close as possible to anything that is like, and I mean anything, that is adversary emulation, threat hunting, threat detection, threat research, anything within that realm from your blue team roles. And that's where detection engineering and DFIR is going to get you there. Start working on that, because that is going to be your next logical step to then get over to a pen test position, or even purple, honestly. And if you're okay with just purple, hello, detection engineering. SOC 1, SOC 2, detection engineer, or SOC 2 and up, that is actually just detection engineer without the official name. And you're on the purple team. Does that help? Yeah, that'd be a great way to do it. And Master, go ahead and make sure like you're studying as well too. And the things that I told Nuit, like building your portfolio, do that at the same time. And if you're already on a blue team, fantastic. You should do your best to be shadowing and working with your security team or your security services and doing vulnerability scans, policy tuning. So, you know, like if you have tickets coming in where users are getting compromised from maybe email delivery or drive-by, something web app related, downloading things, whatever it might be, like whatever your tickets are that are coming in, get involved in the detection space of how you can write rules to detect that from happening and running scans to make sure that they haven't happened. You'll be good. You'll be very good. Then it's just a matter of applying. Yeah, leverage GitHub, for sure. But what do you mean by that? Because I might not be understanding the same thing you're saying. What do you mean by do you leverage GitHub? Oh, I mean, I used to. Yeah. I used to. I don't anymore, but once you're in the field, you're good. Or like I'm not looking for a new job, but if I were, I would be building a portfolio again and like the whole thing. GitHub, blog site. So I got into full-time consulting back, when was it? I think, yeah, so I started in 2019. Yeah, I started in 2019, and then I got into full-time consulting 2020 and up. I think it was around then. But I had got myself to a position where I was an IT manager, sort of like regionally, systems for several of the properties over here in hotels. And from there, I started to work on the security-centric side of things on the IT side, which, I mean, like at that point, security was still really like a lot more in development. It was starting to boom. Like that's when we saw all the positions coming out and everything. So it was still tucked in a lot of traditional workplaces that couldn't afford or wanted to expand into security. Security was still part of IT, like on my job. That's what I'm trying to say. So I just focused more and more on that with policy and permissions, scanning, testing, validation, basically like mini individual findings reports. And then I started to do it for friends and other clients free. And then I started to charge for it. That's how I made my transition into it back then. Yeah. So if you're in a security research role, it'd be easier to make shift. That's kind of what I'm saying is anything you can do on your blue team side that results in like that threat detection and threat engineering and threat research, that is all you need to do while building your portfolio and getting your certs. Certs are optional. Truly. They might be checking the box, but they are optional. And then you should be able to be applying for a pen test position eventually. Yeah, I mean, so master, like I didn't get my OSCP until what, like I think 2 years ish into after I started consulting. And at that time, I knew quite a few pen testers who didn't have their OSCP either. It's not a mandatory requirement, but it certainly will help you on the HR check if you have the OSCP. Now, if you get to a firm that is like, I only hire OSCP, like I have to have it, it's a bit of a red flag to me, but I understand it because, especially like international clients beyond North America, certs, titles, baseball cards, letters after your name, and all this stuff is very like socially valued and business valued, like in terms of like a credit. But your experience should speak for itself. And a cert is still just education. Yeah, exactly. Experience should matter more. Exactly, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Focus on your experience. And that will net you work. Like, master, I guess I'll say it to you this way. If you were looking for a general contractor to work on your house, like a project or something, maybe a carpenter, I don't know, maybe you want to get like a carpenter to go build your shed. You'd want to know their work, right? Like you want to take a look at their catalog and see what they've done. Pictures. You want to see their site or word of mouth recommendation even, like something. Same thing. Cybersecurity is a bunch of trades and you need to show that experience, and ideally you have it paid for on your resume, but if you don't, you can show it in other ways. Yeah. Cool. Well, that's all I got. That was a fun stream. 2 hours. Yeah. Thanks for sticking around. I appreciate you all sticking around and listening to all this, and the questions were great. Good questions, good comments. So thank you very much for stopping by. I think the next stream we're going to do a review on GRC. So I originally started on the GRC side myself. So it's still a passion of mine. I love GRC. I think it's very undervalued in terms of a public opinion, I should say. At a business level, I think we understand. But public perception, people misvalue the importance of GRC, I think. No, GRC is not boring. It doesn't have to be. I'll save that though, CI, for next week. I'll get into my rant of GRC. GRC can be super fun. Alex96 Mar, welcome. First time. Looking again, GRC can be very, very fun. Listen, I'll tell you all this inside a chat, okay? You might hear, right, like the grass is greener on the other side. I like to say that the grass is greener wherever you water it. Oh, hey, Alex. Okay. That's why. Welcome. Okay, the grass is greener wherever you water it. You got to think about that. And I got to fix my sitting posture. Oh, when I talk in these things. Jeez. Welcome back, Alex. Nice. Ready to learn, ready for action. Cool. Well, thank you all again. So this has been a full episode on penetration testing. Well, I mean, not a full episode on the actual job of it, but a pen testing overview and the industry and some of the common questions that are brought up, and maybe some clarification and some perspective of how I think it could be beneficial for you to view things, and some of the recommendations that I have based on my experience and what I've seen of others in the field that I think could provide value for you. So thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for attending. I'm going to cut the stream off over here, though. And I will, I'll see you all in Discord. If you need anything else, hit me up inside Discord. I'll see you inside there. Have a great night, great weekend, everyone. Thank you.